Now let's go back again to the timing of the proclamation, that there was a set date for the destruction of the Jews. The proclamation was given on the 13th day of the first month. Haman came before the king. Remember, verse 7 already said they cast a lot. So the date was chosen earlier, but we find out in verse 13 that the date selected by lot would be Adar 13. It's published on the first month and the 13th day, so the destruction of the Jews, when they are to be killed, would be exactly 11 months later. And Haman gets the king's permission. The letter is written. It's sealed by the king's ring, and it becomes law. It's unalterable. You cannot change or alter the law of the Medes and the Persians. So the proclamation is given on the 13th day of the first month of Ahasuerus' 12th year. So Mordecai had a copy of the writing, and he gave it to Hattak, the chamberlain, and Hattak took it to Esther. So she would have a piece of paper or a scroll of some sort that would have this new decree laid out. And on it would be the time it was given, Adar 13. Right now, we're interested in the dating, in the timing of the decree given and how it relates to Judgment Day, May 21 of 2011. And notice what Esther said when Mordecai sent word back, go into the king. She responds, I have not been called to go into the king for 30 days. True or false? False. She didn't say for 30 days. That's how I've always read it, and I think that's how we've always read it. That the last time she went into the king was 30 days ago. That's how we would say it. The last time I went into the king, into the palace, or personally met with the king. So I haven't been called to come into the king for 30 days. Meaning that was the last time. She's not referring to that. What is she referring to? She says, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. Why these? Now these is a demonstrative pronoun, right? Something's close, something's near, or something's far. These or those. This or that. And it's normally referring to an object, to something that's in view. For instance, this word, if we go to 1 Kings 17 in verse 24, is found there. The word that's translated these. It's a pretty common word. And the woman said to Elijah, now by this I know that thou art a man of God. By this was the action of her son being raised to life. She's referring to a particular thing. Not just anything. By this. It's also found in Esther chapter 9, verse 26. Wherefore they called these days, that's not it, Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore for all the words of this letter, this. So it's this particular letter. There might be a million letters, but this is the letter. And when Esther is saying, I have not been called in unto the king these 30 days, as she can hold up the copy of the writing in her hand, the copy of the decree that was given her, that is probably dated. But even if it wasn't dated, she would know. 13th day of the first month, 30 days ago, the decree was given. And for this period of time, she's trying to explain to Mordecai, to the one who adopted her, look, I've had no opportunity. I've had no chance to make any plea to the king for these 30 days, because that period of time was what was in view between her and Mordecai. That's what she's referring to. Mordecai doesn't care if she went into the king 6 months ago. No, the important thing that they're discussing is the decree that was given, and that's what Esther is referring to. I have not gone into the king. He has not called me to come in unto him these 30 days. Which tells us the date that she and Mordecai are having this discussion. And what date would that be? 30 days later, after 113, because a decree was given on the 13th day of the first month, is the 13th day of the second month, is when she is speaking with Mordecai. Now, why is that important? Well, because what does Esther then say to Mordecai? Look at verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So now God is saying, historically, Esther said to Mordecai, gather the Jews and fast 3 nights and 3 days. Okay, so let's say they began that night. The night of the 13th, the night of the 14th, the night of the 15th. The first day would have been the 14th, the second day the 15th, the third day the 16th. 2:16. 2:16. And it says in chapter 5, verse 1, Now it came to pass on the third day, she goes into the king. 2:16. That's pretty close. Well, somebody might be wondering, close to what? What are you talking about? Well, remember the flood. If we go back to Genesis chapter 7, after 7 days, when God first forewarned Noah and said, Yet 7 days and I'll bring the flood upon the earth, and we realize that statement was given in 4990 BC, and 2 Peter 3 allows us that we give 1,000 years for a day, and you go 7,000 years, and 7,000 years later is 2011. But remember the day that the flood began. It says in verse 11 of Genesis 7, In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. And that began the flood period on the 17th day of the second month of Noah's calendar. And we were all amazed when 7,000 years later, we're looking, well, we know 2011 will be 7,000 years, but where would it fall? Well, it so happens that May 21 was the last day of a 23-year Great Tribulation period. Exactly, from May 21, 88 to May 21, 2011 is a full 23 years. It was also precisely 8,400 days, and 84 has everything to do with Great Tribulation. So there's the spot. God put His finger on it. He locked it in, and we thought, that will be Judgment Day. Actually, what it turned out to be is the day that God shut the door. The day God shut the door. Now, some people say, well, it doesn't say door. It says in Genesis 7 that the Lord shut him in. Well, you tell me what else was shut. What else shut them in? Did they have the door open when the flood came? Of course it was the door. And God uses that language of shut in connection with a door many times. He shut the door, and the door in the Bible represents Christ, and He is the door to heaven, the only door. But that was the great significance of May 21, it was the end of the Great Tribulation after 7,000 years. How else could that have worked out? It had to be God putting His finger on the date. The 17th day of the second month, because May 21 in the Hebrew calendar is the 17th day of the second month, May 21 of 2011. And so God, by causing all that to happen, was saying, yeah, this is the date. This is where you look. Now, in Esther, we find a decree is given. Spiritually, the context is during the Great Tribulation. and it's published to all the world, and it's sent out on the 13th day of the first month, and then Esther refers to a time period of 30 days. 30 is the one number that makes this fit. If there was no period of 3 days and 3 nights and days of fasting, it won't fit. Oh, but someone says it doesn't fit. You're on the 16th day of the second month when she goes into the king. Yeah, but let's read from Esther 5. Now it came to pass on the third day, that would be the 16th day of the second month, that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall even given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. God doesn't want us to miss the timing. 2:16. 2:16, the 16th day of the second month. Come to the banquet. In verse 5, then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow, as the king has said. What date would that be? 17th day of the second month. Now, you see everything that has to fall into place in order for that to work out. Any other date but the 13th day of the first month, it won't fit. If Esther says any other length of time than these 30 days, it won't fit. If they fast for any length of time different than 3 nights and days, it won't fit. If they fast not at all, it won't fit. If they come to the first banquet and everything is laid out there, it doesn't fit. But for some reason, it's come back tomorrow. And God makes a point that we understand she came on the third day, the first banquet was this day, and then tomorrow would be the 17th day of the second month. Now, if what occurred at that second banquet of wine was something that spiritually had no significance, then I would say, well, maybe all these things are coincidences. But what happens on that 17th day? How's it begin? The king that night cannot sleep, and so he has the Chronicles read for this event when the doorkeepers were plotting against the king. And then the king's ears perk up as he reads that the 2 rebel doorkeepers were turned in by Mordecai. And then he would say, what honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai? Haman has a bad day. He has a very bad day when he's in the outer court and he's brought in and he's humbled and brought low right away. He has to take Mordecai, his enemy, around on horseback through the city. What is that doing to Mordecai? It's lifting him up and exalting him. And that's just, things went downhill from there for Haman. And then he is hung on a gallows later that day, on the 17th day of the second month. Later, Haman's 10 sons will be hung. God is illustrating that you're under my curse. The church that became the emissaries of Satan, Satan himself, typified by Haman, his 10 sons, who also are Satan, but it's teaching different aspects of him, and all come under the judgment of God. All will be cursed because they're hung on a tree.